The Austin Independent School District's superintendent is answering questions today after announcing plans to close 13 schools and redraw boundaries that will impact almost every school in the district. KXAN's investigative reporter Kelly Wiley is joining us here after breaking down her conversation with the district's leader. Kelly, welcome. Thanks for being with us again.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of people have questions for Superintendent Matias Segura for sure, so explain what's in the district's consolidation plan.
Well, first, a lot of families are realizing that if this plan goes through, they're going to have a new school zone. This redrawing of school zones is going to impact almost every single school, and through that, a lot of students. So what we do understand is that there are 7 F-rated schools, 7 that have received 3 consecutive Fs that are set to be closed, but then there are also 4 B-rated schools and 1 A-rated school that is set to be closed through this plan. And so that was a big question that we had for the superintendent about why that is. Let's hear his response here. 4 of the schools you all plan to close have B ratings, 1 has an A rating. What's your message to parents who say you're messing up a good thing by closing these schools?
The system as a whole has to serve all students. We do have thriving school communities, and we often talk about the fact that our schools are so much more than a rating, right? I've heard different comments around, well, my student is going to go to a C school versus a B school, and we just spent the last 2 years talking about how our students are more than a score. And so I really want to lean into that. There are incredible schools everywhere in Austin ISD, but not all of our students are getting what they need to be academically successful. And to do that, it requires resources. We recognize it is a transition, but I also have been looking at where some of these changes are occurring, and many of the changes are still, thriving schools going to high-performing thriving schools as well.
Very interesting to hear more about that. But what about those 7 campuses that have those 3 consecutive failing ratings from the state and are now expected to implement turnaround plans?
Right. There are so many moving parts because for a long time, the conversation this year has been, what are we going to do about these F-rated campuses, particularly Dobie, Burnett, and Webb? But then at the same time, we were starting to have conversations about the plans to close schools. And what we know is, and the district has said this, is that closing those F-rated campuses, closing those campuses that have 3 consecutive Fs is not going to erase the state accountability and the state requirements now for those campuses that have gotten to that point. And we asked Superintendent Segura about what happens now that those schools are closing and those kids are moving to different campuses. Let's hear what he had to say.
The way that it's going to work is where there's a consolidation, the majority of students, whatever school that they're going to, that school will then receive the turnaround plan. And so, if you look at the plan, you mentioned 7, there will sometimes be a split where 70% of students are going to one school, 30% are going to another school. The school that receives the 70% of the students will receive the TAP. I also want to be really, really clear, because that school is receiving the TAP, they will also receive additional support.
And you heard him say TAP, that's that turnaround plan. And remember, we've seen what a turnaround plan can look like for Burnett, Dobie, and Webb. The superintendent said he is making a commitment to do things differently, but there are certain requirements. The state has to sign on to whatever plans they create to turn around those schools now that those students are, like he said, under this plan, if approved, moving to different campuses. But I think what's important to remember also is that this is a draft plan. This still has to be voted on by the board. He mentioned today several times that they're open to making tweaks. They've been getting a lot of feedback. He says to date, they've gotten about 700 responses from parents and from community members who are weighing in on this. Some, he said, has been positive, people who like their new school zone, and some, we've been hearing from those families also that are not happy about what the plan is currently. So they're going to bring this to the board November 20th. They're going to vote on it then, and they're expecting parents to give feedback in the meantime.
I know you'll be following it closely, so we look forward to your coverage moving forward. Kelly Wiley, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you for having me.